السلام عليكم. مرحبا جميعا، حياكم الله في لقاءات Think Tech، مبادرة تابعة لوزارة الاتصالات وتقنية المعلومات تهتم في رفع الوعي ونشر المعرفة في التقنيات الناشئة. أنا معكم نورة الصانع من هيئة الحكومة الرقمية. Our topic today is about smart cities. When it comes to smart cities, there isn't a specific targeted market. It's basically it's everyone. It's everybody. All ages are impacted. Older people, kids, people with special needs. It's about visitors and citizens as well. And it's everywhere. Streets, schools, homes, everywhere is impacted, and everyone is impacted. And the more people, the more scope, the more usage, the more traffic, the more complexity we face, and definitely the more challenges. So the circle of impact is very wide when it comes to smart cities and any initiative related to smart cities. So basically for me, smart city definition is the intersection between physical world and the digital world. And from that comes the importance of this topic. We will try today to focus on smart cities in general. What is a smart city? What makes a city smart, or what makes cities smarter than others? And why? Why do we think of smart cities? Is it to make people life easier, better, healthier, or safer even? And what is the government role here in transforming normal cities into smart ones? What are the challenges that we might face? All these type of questions and more definitely will be answered by our guest today. We are honored today to have Mr. Wossim from Gartner. Mr. Wossim is an executive partner at Gartner with areas of expertise that varies between smart cities, digital transformation, data analytics, system integration, innovation, and design thinking. Mashallah, he has more than 16 years experience working with clients across the world, from North Africa, Europe, Australia, and Middle East, working closely with government, with GCC government and private sector leaders in the area of finance, smart cities, fund management, and much more. So welcome, Mr. Wossim. We are glad to have you today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today we'll try to cover several aspects from ecosystem development in general, innovation and enablement. How can we make sure that innovative ideas will be implemented the right way? Human-centric services, how to make sure that the services is focused on human benefit, digital transformation, governance, and the regulations about around this area. And also the door is open for any additional questions from the guests. But let's start with the basic question. What is a smart city? What makes a city smart? And if you allow me to ask this question in two forms, or to have the answer in two forms. One is the scientific perspective. What are the main characteristics of a smart city? And what makes the city smart? And probably the second perspective would be in simple word from citizen perspective. If we ask anyone on the street, how smart is your city? What do you think the answer would be? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me once again. I'll to be able to answer your question, let me first maybe give a very quick and high-level brief about smart cities and how we got here. I really appreciate your question about what makes a city smart, both from a technical standpoint and a human-centric standpoint. More importantly, why? What's the big deal if the city was smart versus not smart? So in a moment, hopefully you'll see my screen, and then I'll be able to share with you the smart city. So you see my screen, Nora?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. So very briefly, a history of smart cities. Let's call them 1.0 to currently 3.0. With over 10 years ago up until now. cities, smart cities 1.0 were basically things that were very much technology driven, right?
Yeah.
Smart electricity grid, technology focused, doesn't really focus on how the machine or the technology interacts with the people, the citizens, the visitors, so on and so forth. Think of like smart grid, smart metering, or basically technical elements of interacting, like paying for a parking spot with actual money, or maybe even with a credit card. We move on to Smart Cities 2.0. Here we start the evolution. It's technology enabled, but it's city led. Means that the human interaction, it's starting to make itself into the technology part. So it's no longer technology driven, it's technology driven, but also process led. Think of it something like, how do I, what's a better process for me to find a parking spot versus just driving around town to find a parking spot? How can technology help me improve my daily activity or my daily commute? How can I start to interact with the various elements of the city and all the city has to offer in a better way? And then you move to Smart Cities 3.0, which is basically now, which is very much, it's still focused on using technology and digital, but it's very much focused around society, the people, increasing the type of living, increasing the quality of living, even impacting positively the culture. It's very much data driven, meaning it's no longer a one size fits all type platform, if I can call it that, but because through smart cities, you can collect a lot of data, then you can get a lot of intelligence on people's behavior, resident behavior, the flow of traffic, the pattern of weather according to certain things, how it impacts human behavior, ila akhirih. So the smart city now is, believe it or not, much more focused on people and a lot less focused on technology. But it is powered and fueled by leading technology, by leading data concepts, by cutting edge digital innovation, and all of these things. So it's very interesting to see. And by the way, in a relatively short amount of time, 10 years in the span of technology isn't that long of a time. Cities really, or the concept of smart cities, have accelerated, which we are very, very happy to see that. And the adoption of the services that the smart city has to offer to its residents and citizens have also increased. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a bit of a quick brief, but also an answer is what is a smart city from a technical standpoint, but also a smart city from a human standpoint is at the core of it, it should make the human experience better. It should make the interaction and the usage of the city better, with its anything as basic as finding a parking spot, to finding a museum and cultural centers, to really knowing your way to navigating around the city and how to maximize living in the city, from the air quality to the safety and security, and to the economic sustainability of the city itself, and more importantly, environmentally and the ease of mobility around the city.
So can we think of reaching the smart cities will be done in 3 steps, if we could say: collecting data, processing data, and building services around these data? Is this correct?
It is correct, but again, that is a very much a technical view, right? So getting the data, obviously, yes, you have to be able to get the data, analyze the data, process it to understand trends, human behavior, what's being utilized, how to improve it. But I would say that is incomplete, because what you need to layer on top of that is, what is the human element that you're trying to either A, fix or improve. So if you're gathering data around air quality, for example, then the idea isn't just to collect data around air quality, but how can you make air quality better to improve the livability of a certain city? If you're trying to collect information about traffic pattern, is how can I, through perhaps concepts such as design thinking and innovation, make the commute a lot less? Because people drive their cars less, which means they pollute a lot less. So you're also impacting the air quality. So it's an ecosystem of things that are intertwined that, when holistically looked at, improve the overall livability of a city.
If you allow me to ask, what's missing in this ecosystem? Probably it's a bit early to discuss the challenges, but since we are talking about the whole ecosystem, what is missing in this ecosystem?
Well, to answer that question, it's not a one size fits all, because it also depends on the city that you're talking about. There's an ideological way of looking into it, but there's also a practical way into looking at it. So as we described, a city, a sustainable execution path, as I'm showing on my screen here, is you have the ecosystem, you have the strong collaboration, and we also have the city as a platform. Okay, so you really need those three things. You need the ecosystem to drive the purpose and the vision, to define the funding and the investment, assuming the smart city is also driven by one, say, entity. So for example, in the Middle East, especially in GCC country, what we notice is the approach to smart cities is generally, with exceptions, centralized. Meaning, for example, digital government, like DGA, is trying to push smart cities and is working with other entities to be able to push concept of smart cities forward. What we notice slightly differently in Europe and in the Middle East is that in Europe and the Americas, and even in Far East, is that smart cities also are a huge priority, but they're not centralized through one department necessarily. So some municipalities would be doing smart city concepts, other cities would have their own smart city initiatives. Some towns sometimes may also have on a smaller scale, but and they generally try to talk with each other, but it's driven in a sort of much different way. I think in the GCC, having a central and focal point to drive smart cities will have an accelerating effect to basically get value from smart cities. So to answer your question around what's missing, let me actually fast forward to this sort of slide. What we see right now is a lot of things around, there's efforts around things like I'm collecting data around public safety, I'm collecting data around mobility, I'm collecting data from waste or smart lighting and all of that. But the way this data is being processed holistically is generally not quite mature.
Okay. Right?
So if I'm trying to fix, again, human-centric, right? So if I'm trying to do smart living and smart buildings and smart everything, these are all, again, the objective here, which I feel like I have to remind everyone, the goal is not for a city to be smart, right? The goal is for a city to improve the quality of life and society for its inhabitants. Exactly. It just so happens in our current age, it's through digital transformation and the technologies that we have available today. So people sometimes confuse smart being the journey versus the destination. It's not the destination. The destination is basically improving human mobility, healthcare, safety, security, sustainability, environment through smart city initiatives.
Exactly. And this probably answer the question is why smart cities? So the answer would be a better life, better quality.
Yes, it's basically elevate all of the current, because by the way, the smart city for Riyadh, for example, will be very different than smart city for Belgium, even though you're both maybe using the same technology and even the same vendors sometimes. Why? Because some of the challenges that a city like Belgium may have are very, very different than a city like Riyadh may have. So for example, there could be a lot more focus in Belgium, say, on safety and security. Riyadh in general doesn't have a huge issue when it comes to crime or safety and security. So the way you use smart technologies to solve problems will differ. But back to your point, the why is to be able to elevate the human experience, to squeeze value from your city, and to be able to basically make it sustainable and long lasting. Because as you know, right now, the green movement is very strong. Sustainability movement is very strong. Circular economy is very strong and highly trending, and we believe it will be for a while. And all of these things are heavily enabled by smart city concepts.
Thank you for clarifying that. And there is a question, an interesting question, which is related to what we have mentioned here. How do we link the culture with the concept of smart cities? Is there any use case that is already applied based on that perspective? So I believe we touched some of these. Yeah.
That's an excellent question, because the weakest link in general, as we go through these big sort of, as we saw Smart City 1, let me go back to it. Smart City 1.0 to 3.0. What you'll see here is, if you wanted to look at the 3 pillars of any sort of major work or implementation, it's people, process, and technology. And technology is evolving, but generally, if it's available somewhere around the world, you should be able to acquire it, especially if it's through a vendor. So if it's a smart light or a smart sensor or Internet of Things or any of that, you can get it. Process-wise, again, there's process engines out there or process flows, or you can acquire that. I'm not saying these things are easy, but I'm saying that they seem to be a lot more readily available. The third element is people. And people are always the slowest to adopt technology, because generally while change is very frequent, generally people aren't very comfortable with.
Don't you think this has changed after the pandemic? We're easily adapted now.
Well, yes, that's actually a great point, but it took a force of a global pandemic to force people to change.
Yes.
So in a way, people didn't have a choice but to adapt. So I'm not trying to say that the pandemic was a positive thing, but if the pandemic proved anything, is that adopting digital and smart technologies, any hesitation before, now it's gone. So the adoption rate from this point on should be a lot quicker, and a lot higher. So from now on, how do I change the culture around it, which is an excellent question. And the way you do it is through what we call small nudges. Here's what I mean. If someone, let's take a city as, it's just one person, right? And if that person, for example, is a smoker, a heavy smoker, say, well, this is bad for you. How are you going to stop? The worst thing you could do is take the cigarettes away. Maybe what you could do is say, if you smoke 20 cigarettes a day, try tomorrow to smoke 19. Maybe next week, instead of smoking 19 full cigarettes, smoke 19 cigarettes, only 50%, so on and so forth. So to apply that to a smart city, you say, you can't say today you were paying for parking with physical money, and then tomorrow suddenly everyone has to pay for parking through their app. What you do is you have a change management process and a very, very robust communication strategy, as far-reaching as possible, by saying, we're adopting smart cities. Here's why smart cities will make your life a lot better. In the next 6 months, here are the initiatives that we will deploy. You will be able to, through this app, you will be able to find where the available parking is. You will be able to pay for parking through the app. And then you will be able to find or order transportation very quickly around there. For example, if it's around the time where there's rush hour or whatever. So these sorts of marketing campaigns help a lot in the culture change. But again, it has to be gradual. By the way, gradual doesn't mean it's going to take 10 years.
Yes.
Gradual just means that don't shock or surprise people with the change.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
If you tell people what to expect, then you give them what you told them was going to come.
Yeah.
The rate of research has shown that the rate of adoption is way quicker. But if today and for the last 10 years I show up to my work and pay for my parking, and then suddenly in the morning, what is this new system? I don't have the app. I don't understand what's going on. Then you'll get a lot more resistance. Mm-hmm. But if through campaigns, through TV, radio, text messages, social media, so on and so forth, you start to have a hype around it and excitement, people will really look forward to using the services.
Yes, definitely. Since we talked about government role here, where is the private sector, and how would government, let's say, encourage private sector in this whole smart cities?
Yeah, great question. There is no smart city. There is no successful smart city today without the involvement of the private sector.
Definitely.
By design, you cannot have a smart city without involving the private sector, and you want to involve the private sector for a number of reasons. Smart city can be a catalyst for innovation. So if you have a startup that has a new technology that will very much fit under the smart city or sustainability or environmental or immobility, you want to give these startups a platform to be able to shine and scale. And the smart city is an absolute great way to do it. You can do it through something like allowing them to do it directly, or you can do like a PPP, which is a public-private partnership model. You could do revenue sharing, but the smart city is a platform basically for people to create, for people to excel, and for people to incubate and innovate. Plus, the government or governments in general don't have the scale or the skill set to be able to do a full portfolio of services for a smart city. So the best they could do is they can, through regulation, which I'm sure we'll talk about it, through ease of doing business, through enablement of certain things like presence of cloud computing, providing of 5G networks, providing of flexible governance model, you can really have these private sectors thrive. And through the thriving of the private sector, the government will thrive as well. I mean, there's always the cliche that anything involved in government is slow and not effective, and not an efficient spending of the public money, which just isn't true, especially now with smart cities. And one thing that the pandemic did is it evened a little bit the playing field between government and the private sector, because once the digital technology is there, it can be adopted by government as well, and it can be proven. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you so much. What about the citizens? How can we encourage citizens themselves to participate in this, share their innovative ideas? How can we engage them in this whole ecosystem?
Yeah. So a number of cities and towns in Europe, to some extent the US, they have adopted the concept, and I'm sure this is not new to anyone here, of innovation labs. And these innovation labs are multidimensional. They play a role of a museum. You can go and see what technologies are being used and how they perform and all of that. So you can go observe and appreciate. They play a role of, they provide innovation as a service. So you can use some of those labs to do hackathons, to do design thinking workshops, to get ideas, and also collaborate with other big vendors like the Microsofts, the Oracles, the IBMs of the world, so on and so forth. And another dimension is, so number two is you can incubate ideas. And the third dimension is it's a space where people can come in and suggest ideas And you don't have to be a big company. You don't have to be a small company. Anyone can suggest new ideas, whether it's through a portal, through coming in physically and suggesting the idea, or doing a demo. And I know certain cities do a quarterly review of those ideas that citizens actually suggest. And if an idea is reviewed and adopted, they name the service after the person or the company who suggested it. So they give people incentive saying, if you don't like anything and if you have an idea to change it, come forth with your idea. And if it's actually implemented and all of that, we'll call it, the Nora smart parking meter, or the Wossim smart air sensor, or the
Interesting.
that sort of stuff. It's just a way for giving people accountability for their invention that they did as well. Yeah.
When we talk about these kind of innovative ideas or services at the end, can they be considered as luxury, or it is a necessity for people?
So let me fast forward, and I'll talk about. So if you think of a smart city, let's talk about a smart city service that, let's see if it's a luxury or a necessity. Say I'm at home and I'm starting to feel very weak and very sick, and I call an ambulance. Through smart city technologies, that ambulance knows not only exactly where I am, exactly how to get to me, what's the closest hospital with the need that I may or may not have, with basically with my profile being already available. So when I show up to the hospital, they already know my weight, my age, if I have any medical history, ila akhirih. So through that service, maybe it's a matter of life and death, right? Because the ambulance was able to get to me quickly. They already had my information. They took me to the right hospital, ila akhirih. So to me, that's a necessity, right?
Yes.
That could have been saved my life. But if I'm going to find, if I'm walking down the street and I want to find the closest museum through a smart city guide, or the closest bus stop, is that a need or a luxury? That's a luxury. It's an improvement. So the answer to your question is it depends.
Yes.
And we should not look at it as a luxury versus necessity. We should look at it as, does it improve something? Does it optimize something? Does it solve a problem? So all these elements that you see here, whether it's human services, economy, environment, infrastructure, so on and so forth, a service that, a smart city service that improves air quality is not something that is a you talk to me, that's not a luxury, that's a necessity. I want my children in the future to breathe clean air. But if that is not available right now, that doesn't mean I'm going to have an adverse effect to me momentarily. Does that make sense? So I think in general, most, if not all, smart city services are a must-have from a conceptual standpoint, meaning that no major city around the world can afford not to be a smart city going forward, is what I would feel.
Since we mentioned these scenarios, can we talk a bit about citizen or visitor's journey, the whole journey, let's say, and let's take an example of holy cities or cities like Mecca city. How can we enhance the citizen or the visitor's journey with the concept of smart cities?
Yeah, I'll see if I actually have a quick slide on this here. Let me just I do apologize for my scrolling, but let me just put this up here for you. But the journey, if you're talking about a visitor, say I'm going to Mecca for Hajj and Umrah, right? And I'm not a Saudi resident or citizen. Say I'm in Indonesia somewhere, right? when does my trip start?
Since the decision, since I decide to go.
Exactly. So there should be a way where my journey from deciding that I want to go to Hajj or Umrah all the way to getting to my destination and back, and even after that, needs to be under a smart city concept or journey. So for example, you could either go through an app to say, here's where you book you create a profile. Through that profile, you can book an airplane ticket. Through, on your way to the airport, you'll know exactly where to go through the app, because the app already knows, what kiosk and what's going on. Once you land in, say Mecca or Jeddah airport, you'll be able, through wayfinding, know exactly where to go, either the closest bus or the closest taxi station or wherever. By the time you get to your hotel, they already have your information. They already have checked you in, and they already have your luggage. So as I'm explaining this sort of journey, what you notice is there's very little friction process, right? You create a profile once, you decide sort of what you want to do as far as your journey at a high level, and the path and the journey, the relative amount of accuracy is decided for you. So in general, if you don't live in Saudi and you want to come to Saudi for Hajj and Umrah, at a basic level, you need an airplane ticket. You'll need, so that's air transportation. You'll need ground transportation. You'll need accommodation, which is obviously a hotel or an Airbnb or whatever. You need transportation to the holy sites. And if you're trying to enhance your visit and do other touristic stuff in the city or in Saudi in general, it may suggest some things to you to do along the way as well. And then also, after you go back to your home country, in this case, for example, Indonesia, then you'll have basically a post-trip sort of availability to provide feedback or any of that stuff. Now, some of my listeners may be thinking, well, that's all available, which is true. None of the concepts that I just mentioned right now are particularly new or earth-shattering. But you would be very surprised that the continuity of that journey and the practical touch points of the journey, from me deciding and I want to go to Hajj and Umrah all the way through and back, it's still highly fragmented. Why? Because the various parties that provide transportation and accommodation and touristic aren't quite talking with each other from a proper data integration standpoint. And this brings me, and again, I do apologize for my scrolling here. No. This brings me to the urban integration, right? So I've got data coming in from various sources. Right now, the data from Murur or the Ministry of Transport or from various hospitals or from various isn't quite integrated, because people say, I don't want to share my data. I don't want to tell you about my medical history. I don't want to. And people don't understand that it's not a binary thing, right? I can still give you information about my general behavior trends without giving my personal information on privacy. And now everyone is hearing about open data policies and open data, and and that's at the heart of it. And once you apply conceptualization to it through proper data modeling and architecture and infrastructure, then you get to also improve that journey along the way.
So we went back again to the data element, and how can, or what regulations do you see here? How can we protect the citizen information and the data collected here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Through Gartner surveys, we found two very interesting and very conflicting statistics. Statistic one is, us as individuals, we want highly personalized services and products. Also, us as individuals, we want highly privatized, and we don't want to share any of our data.
Exactly.
So if I don't want to give you any information about myself, what do I like, the things that I like to do, the areas I'd like to visit, my general behaviors and all that, how can you offer me personalized services? Okay, and so that's always been a challenge. And a lot of, at the heart of all of this, governments don't really want to share their citizens' data, right? So if I'm a private company and I come to the Saudi government and say, hey, I can create some highly customized services and products for your citizens and your residents, please give me this data. Unlikely. So the way you can go around it is through data, what we call data democratization. You come and say, hey, Nura, there's some data that if you're willing to share may increase the products and the services through the smart cities that you get. Then it's up to you to share as little or as much as you would like to share. Can I get your name? Some people say, no, that's too private. Some people say, no, everyone knows my name. You can have my name. Okay. Can I get your age? Can I get your gender? Can I get, your, employment? Can I get your interests? So the more information that you opt in, the more, your persona is being addressed. So that's one element of it, is democratizing. And at some point, if you decide that, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shared too much, then you say, you know what, you go to the portal, which is normally a government portal, and you say, you know what, I don't want you to know my age anymore. I don't want you to know my gender anymore. That's it. So what happens through proper data governance and architecture, that data is actually deleted. Not archived where someone can then go pull it up. No, that data is actually deleted. Nura, we don't longer know what she does and where she goes. Deleted. And that is made public. So people really are comfortable with saying, you know what, I'll share more, a little bit more. And so that's one element of it through data democratization. The other element is through studying of mass sort of trends and behavior. So for example, I'll give a very, very basic example. Let's say you don't read the news, you don't read social media, but you're getting data from hospitals. And in the last 2 years, you're noticing a huge tick up in hospital admissions when it comes to a certain virus. You may conclude that there is a pandemic going on. So with that, you can maybe address certain things around how do we figure out medicine administration or vaccine administration, so on and so forth. So there are certain general or mass trends that a good data scientist or data scientist can glean from it and still be able to provide certain services. So it's all about properly sifting through the data and understanding the trends and nuances. And by the way, Smart City is an excellent source of all this data. It'll collect data from the environment. It'll collect data from your traffic. It'll collect data from the seas. It'll collect data from all kinds of human behavior. It'll collect data from population and congestion. It'll collect data of how many people are being born in hospitals, so on and so forth. So, and you can put it all together and run simulations and scenarios on it, and you get wonderful results, obviously.
Perfect. If you allow me to take some of the questions that we have received in the chat. So what are the main challenges that could face KSA while adopting IoT in most sectors? I believe we touched some of the challenges, but we can talk about the challenges again. Don't mind.
Yeah, I'm no stranger to the Saudi market, let's just say that. But as far as challenges in implementing this, I'll go back to the data topic. I work with a number of ministries in Saudi, and while there are integrations with certain parties, like for example, if you want to go renew your driver's license or you want to renew the inspection on your car, you show up and there is integration between certain, the identity department, the inspection department, I'm calling them departments, I know they're not called, but So there is integration, but there isn't just yet a centralized place where the totality of data is being analyzed. Because while various government entities are happy to partner with each other, they still hold any data that they don't have to share close to their heart. And for good reason, because they want to respect people's data and privacy and all that. So a challenge is to create a proper data platform that you can get insights and demographic information from it. And as a result, you can publish policies and have a positive impact as a result of it. That's challenge number one. Challenge number two is to be able to create, remember we talked about the ecosystem before, right? Of these partnerships between the private and the public. Generally, people, when they're having a startup, the last thing, they don't generally think of government as the first channel to scale their business, right? Because there's a lot of red tape in government and all of that. So the challenge is for the Saudi government is to be able to تكون يعني روادة إذا فينا نقول, or a pioneer in the ease of regulation to foster this innovation movement, to foster this startup scene. For example, when fintech boomed in Europe, the US, and all of that, it's because there was a landscape that allowed for that sort of industry boom. So a place like DGA has to really think seriously about regulation that is highly adaptive. And let me show this here. Meaning that the governance of control is very different than the governance of autonomy. So for example, a adaptive governance goes from control to autonomous, right? What is the difference? So control, outcome, agility, and autonomous. Say you have a cybersecurity department. The type of governance you put around cybersecurity is very rigid, right? Very boxed in, very you can't mess around with it. It's very serious business. So these are the rules, these are the policies, these are the regulations, you must follow. But you cannot apply this sort of governance to, for example, an innovation mindset, because innovation is all about trying different things, failing, experimenting. So you need to be able to have a little bit of room to try different things. So if I'm a startup,
like a sandbox or something.
Exactly. So when regulation is being put, it really has to be very adaptive, meaning that it cannot be a one-size-fits-all regulation. It has to be a regulation that allows and even encourages and fosters innovation around these smart cities. So you cannot talk about open data and API ecosystem, but not have the regulatory standpoint behind it. You can't talk about blockchain and smart contracts, but not allow for the application of those smart contracts in government. Everyone talks about smart contracts in land deeds and in buying and selling anything of value, like a car, for example, or a piece of land. So if I come to you and say, Nora, I like your car, I understand you want to sell it, through blockchain and smart contracts, we can do this transaction in 30 seconds without having to go to to the registration department or whatever. So governance for this particular scenario needs to be, the government needs to be able to regulate this, needs to be able to have visibility on this, okay, without impeding or delaying the process. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Probably, I think you already answered a different question around how can the concept of smart cities is applied when there are too many different sectors operate separately. I think by defining the role of, let's say, an orchestrator, this will help all government agencies to work within the whole ecosystem. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And this comes back to, as you rightly mentioned, I sort of answered the question here is, you know, governing use cases around healthcare will be very different than governing use cases around, for example, air quality.
Military. Oh, yeah.
Or military. You actually made an excellent point. So there needs to be this sort of flexibility and agility around regulatory policies. You know, DGA, for example, is a regulator, but also an advisor, but also it should play a role of an enabler. They should be the catalyst of digital transformation, of smart city enablement, of encouraging people to come and really implement things in a place like Saudi. What's beautiful about the GCC, and specifically Saudi Arabia now, this sort of renaissance going on right now, right? I mean, you know, that's what's happening in Saudi right now is not happening anywhere around the world. Like, there are cities being built from scratch right now. Think of the Red Sea, think of Neom, think of Jeddah, think of all these mega projects. Basically, Saudi government is creating these amazing things from basically dirt, right? And I can't think of any other country on the planet that's happening. So this is creating an awesome opportunity for innovation, for pioneering certain things, for having these sort of mega projects set the example for the rest of the world of how proper things can be done. And the Saudi government is showing basically a lot of support, either when it comes to funding, when it comes to encouragement, and when it comes, they really want people who have great ideas to come and implement those ideas. So now is an absolute awesome opportunity to throw more fuel on this fire, you know?
Exactly. So do you think it's more challenging, or it's easier to build something from scratch versus something, or transforming a normal city? What is more challenging here?
You ask 10 people this question, you probably get 10 different answers. The advantage of building something from scratch is, say I'm visiting, I haven't had the pleasure of visiting anything in the Red Sea, mostly because it's not ready yet, but let's say I go to the Red Sea. I'm very familiar with Riyadh, by the way, but let me think of me landing in Riyadh airport versus me landing, say, in Red Sea. Riyadh airport is well established. It's been there for decades and decades and decades. It has a lot of air traffic going back and forth. So the momentum is always there. To be able to change something that would involve, say, take something very simple like Riyadh airport, it has to be planned incredibly carefully, right? Because you don't want to disrupt anything that may cause a security impact, economic impact, or just a bad experience for travelers and visitors. So something like the city of Riyadh, the airport of Riyadh, extra care has to be taken in order to implement change or technology. When you're building a brand new airport, you don't have that problem, right? You just basically take best in class, you see what works for you for that area, and you implement it. So when people land in that airport and in that city, that's what they would expect. They would, you know, it's a blank canvas. So from that standpoint, it's easier. Okay. Now, what you don't have in those greenfield implementation is historical data. So you basically implement a technology based on certain lessons learned or best practices, hoping that would work. But if you're implementing something in Riyadh, for example, you have historical data, you have evidence, you have trends, you have data specific for that airport, that location, that city, that you know how to fix. So
challenges, previous challenges, probably.
Exactly. So while change may happen a bit slower, it happens with higher confidence than a greenfield implementation. So you just have to weigh the pros and cons of it.
Definitely. We have lots of questions here, and hopefully we can answer most of them. There is an interesting question here. In your opinion, what are the current business opportunities for startups? Let's try to link it with smart cities, if we can.
So, for example, I'm putting in front of you an example of an AI use case present for smart cities, right? And let me just explain it a bit. This is split into business value and feasibility. Feasibility is, let me see if I can explain feasibility to you. Feasibility in this context is technical feasibility. Is a technology there? Can I do it? Internal readiness, do I have the skills and the culture and the capabilities to it? And external readiness, like regulation, and can I do, does the ecosystem allow me to do it? From a business value standpoint, do I have the money? Is it attractive to the user? And does it give me any competitive edge? Make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So I go to these scenarios, and I do apologize, it's a bit of a busy slide, but these are practical use cases that have, some of them, a lot of them have been done before. So for example, let's talk about social credit development. Do you know what social credit is? So for those who may not be familiar with social credit, you're familiar with a financial, like credit score in the US, for example. If you pay your bills on time, everything on time, your credit score goes up. That's a financial credit. In China, they're implementing what's called a social credit. So for example, if there's you get to intersection and there's a red light, say you cannot cross, and you cross anyways, for example, and you get caught, you get a black mark. If you break some other law sort of in your city, you get another black mark. But if you're a good behaving citizen, you get higher marks.
Yes.
Very basic concept. And based on your social credit, the higher your social credit, you get a lot more services and ease of doing business provided to you. Okay, so that's just one example. So if you're a startup trying to think of ideas, first of all, think of a technology or a service or a product that will solve a current challenge or an issue, or greatly optimize something. I'll give you a very basic example of optimization. A train is a very good mode of transportation. Okay, but now Saudi is talking about implementing the Hyperloop.
Yes.
Right? So a Hyperloop is a highly optimized mode of transportation. It's basically a train on steroids that goes, I don't know, 900 miles an hour or something like that. Abu Dhabi to Dubai in 20 minutes or something like that, right? So, obviously Elon Musk, when he thought about the Hyperloop, the idea of transporting people from one city to another through a train-like device is not new, but he found a new way to basically say it can be a lot better, it can be a lot quicker. So when you're thinking about a startup, first element is obviously think of a technology, solution, or product that will fix a problem or optimize something. You can get a lot of inspiration from stuff like this, like predictive policing, for example, is a good use case. Disease control, which is very relevant for our current information. Video analytics on crowd movement, smart dynamic parking, all of these things. And then don't forget about the business value and the feasibility. So these are some of the things that I would think of. So let's take some practical examples. So human services, for example, disease control, circular waste classification, social welfare. This was applied in Virginia Beach in the US, and the case study is data learnings from different health and environmental data repositories to predict health threats such as dengue fever, applying infectious curve, especially in emerging economies. And it gives you a score of the business value and the feasibility. And then it gives you the impact. The business impact is it directly impact health and well-being of individuals and directly contributing to economy, public safety, and environmental protection. The feasibility is you apply through AI and machine learning. So that sort of methodical thinking is how this use case has become to being applied. I hope that answered the question. I don't know.
I believe yes, it did. There's another question around the internet. They see it as a challenge here. The internet is not available everywhere in KSA. Do you think this is a big issue now, and how we could overcome that?
So in major cities in Saudi, the internet is obviously available. So Jeddah, Mecca, Riyadh, all the major provinces, internet is available. But بالمناطق النائية or in remote areas, like most countries, internet may be a bit less. Now, I think Saudi, by the way, is the #1 or #2 country in the world when it comes to
5G. 5G, I guess.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Nora.
You mean the internet coverage?
Yes, coverage, but also the amount of devices. The average Saudi person, I think, hold 2 cell phones or 2 devices or something like that. And Saudi Arabia is the #1 country, or the #2, I don't remember, that that uses social media. So the and by the way, as you all know, Saudi Arabia as a demographic is a very young demographic. So there's not a lot of aging population. So the combination of a very young demographic, the combination of the availability of this technology and internet will accelerate these sorts of things. Now, I think the question is asked saying, yeah, smart cities is available and amazing, but how can you apply smart city if you don't have 5G or even basic connectivity? And I think the answer to that question is, especially in a country like Saudi, they are very aware of their mobility and connectivity infrastructure. And Saudi, if you guys look at the Vision 2030 and beyond, has ambition and very ambitious plans to grow population and to grow economies and diversify economy. So me personally, unless I'm missing something, I'm not too concerned about good infrastructure coming to these areas.
Okay. I'm conscious of the time. We have 3 minutes left. So I'll try to take the last question. How can digital towns, I guess, contribute to smart cities?
How can digital...
Yeah, I'm not sure if I got the question right.
Well, digital is at the heart of smart city. And by the way, we need to understand and agree what digital is.
Yeah, so it is basically the digital twin.
Digital twin, yeah. Our digital twin is an amazing technology. For those of you who are not familiar with digital twin basically is taking a city like Riyadh or Mecca or whatever, the actual city, and creating a metaverse, a digital version of that city. Why? What's the benefit? The benefit here is you can then run multiple scenarios holistically on the city, whether it's traffic, pollution, population, for the next 10, 12, 50 years, to see what sort of changes, whether they are actual changes, policy, regulation, all of that, how will they impact the city? So for example, you take a digital snapshot of Riyadh right now, and let's say there's an area of Riyadh where you want to build a high-rise building like the zone where it was meant for financial district, right? So you can before you build that, if you had a digital twin, then you can say, I'm going to build this. Now let's simulate traffic patterns. Now let's simulate the economic impact of having. Now let's simulate the flow of people in and out. Now let's simulate sort of how will that impact things like safety and security, that sort of things. So digital twin in concept is an amazing implementation. In practicality, it's a bit difficult because to properly do digital twins, you really have to integrate with various key parties to feed the data from different areas in order to do it. Now, it's not all bad news because you can start small. You can start with a digital area or neighborhood, and then sort of grow from there. So absolutely. By the way, digital concepts and digital twins are a great idea. By the way, and maybe I'm running out of time here, but I just want to clarify, when we say what is digital versus digitization, digitization is basically turning something into zeros and ones.
Yes.
Digital involves the business process or how you actually interact with technology. A very, very basic example is that 15 years ago, you would go down to the street, you would wait for a car to pass by, you would hail a taxi, the taxi will come and get you and you'll go to your destination. Now, you open up your cell phone, you click on Uber or Careem, you order a taxi, you will see when the taxi is at your house, then you will go down, you give them the destination, they go, you leave the taxi and it charges your credit card. In both situations, you went from point A to point B.
Same result, yeah.
Same result. But in digital, it was a lot less friction. There's a lot less friction, a lot more efficient, and your experience through it is incredibly improved.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you want from digitizing smart cities or digitalizing smart cities, is by having the city and you interact in a much better and more efficient and productive way.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Wasim. Really appreciate it. It was a very interesting discussion. Apologies for those who we couldn't answer their questions. Hopefully you had a very fruitful discussion. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Thank you, Wasim.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.